Fame, fortune, and fast cars. That's the playboy lifestyle most Formula 1 drivers expect. But what happens when you want rid of all that? What happens when an F1 driver wants to go back to being a nobody? And most of all, why would that even happen? Well, for a Formula 1 driver, Nelson Latifi started his racing career relatively late on in life, with him only beginning go-karting at age 13. It's important to remember that most Formula 1 drivers begin between the ages of 6 and 8. So Latifi would have to put the work in if he wanted to get anywhere. Well, he did have one other factor going for him that would almost certainly increase his opportunities of succeeding in racing. His father, Michael Latifi, owns a multi-billion-dollar food company called Safina Foods, which did give Nicholas access to a near unlimited pool of money to fund his racing career. This would help Latifi move on from go-karts to make his open-wheel debut at Italian Formula 3. His results were far from the most spectacular you've ever seen, but his one win and 3 other podiums were enough to get him into European Formula 3, the next step up. See, until you're in the top levels of motorsport, these teams care a lot more about what finance and sponsors you can bring than whether you're going to be the next prodigy. From here then, with his father's backing, Latifi continued to provide rather unspectacular results. Look, it's not that he was terrible, but racing for top teams like Carlin and Prema, he struggled to really achieve any podiums or wins across any of the series he competed in, and he was certainly not putting up any championship fights. So this really paints a picture of the driver we're dealing with. Clearly, he has a strong passion for racing, and on his day, Latifi could certainly be fast. There were poles, wins, and podiums scattered through his career. However, realistically, it wasn't particularly his driving that was pushing his career forward, and was almost certainly the huge stacks of the green stuff. No, wait, hang on, not that green. Anyway, Latifi would find some more success in the next step of his career. In 2016, Nick Latifi secured a GP2 seat with Dams, and would retain that for the next year when the series became known as Formula 2. And this was where he finally ended his massive drought of wins, taking the Silverstone Sprint victory and ending a 5-year career period with no wins. From here, things would finally start to ramp up for Latifi, until 2019 saw perhaps the best season of his racing career. Nicholas took 4 Formula 2 wins and a further 4 podiums to finish second in the championship behind winner Nick de Vries. Now, before we get too hyped up here, there is a couple things to know. Firstly was that Latifi had debuted in GP2 in 2014 and had raced full-time in the series for 4 years at this point, giving him vastly more experience than most on a grid which usually has a reasonably fast turnover of drivers. Perks of being a billionaire's son. Secondly, he lost the championship to Nick de Vries, who, while has been a relatively high-achieving driver in his own right, let's just say didn't take to Formula 1 as was expected. So maybe means the benchmark that year wasn't the most competitive grid. Nevertheless, this result is still a good and highly competitive result. It would be completely unfair to diminish his achievements, given that there was still a handful of brilliant and great drivers competing against Latifi. What this result did do, as well as a little bit more help from Michael Latifi's pockets, was secure him a Formula 1 seat alongside George Russell at Williams for 2020. That would be very easy to just stop here and say the rest is history. However, let's look at what kind of driver Latifi was setting up to be and how that led to his eventual downfall. First off, we can probably assume Nicholas himself would have been feeling reasonably confident coming off that strong result in F2, but it is hard to ignore the doubts that might have been in his mind. I'm certain he'll always have remembered those many years he went without a win, and that could certainly affect his motivation and mentality. Then there's actually the team he was going into. It's no doubt this was possibly Williams' lowest ever point in the sport. From a team that had dominated in the 90s to now being unable to get their F1 cars ready for pre-season testing. There wasn't exactly high expectations, with them scoring just 1 singular point the year before. But partnering Latifi was somewhat a shining star for Williams. George Russell, a driver making a bit of a name for himself by making the most of any opportunity given to him and being strongly linked to the Mercedes Mercedes Formula 1 team. So Latifi wouldn't be without the competition of his teammate. Now, this first season went as expected, with Williams performing even worse than the previous year, taking 0 points the entire season, with both Latifi and George only being able to achieve highest finishes of 11th in the Williams car. But look, if you've heard anything about Latifi, it's that he was crash happy. But let's actually take a real look at this first year. To start with, he crashed on his debut FP3 session in Austria. An unfortunate mistake, but if you look at just race results, he only had 3 DNFs the entire year. One was in a multi-car crash at the Tuscany safety restart, one was at the Turkish Grand Prix, which was a weekend of skill issues, and his final race DNF was in Sakir, where his car suffered from an oil leak despite him running up in 13th ahead of Alfa Romeo's and Haas cars. Now, don't get me wrong, there were more crashes and spins during qualifying and such, but at the end of the day, it wasn't necessarily the worst results ever, and it looked like there wasn't much more he could have done in terms of scoring more points with what was an awful car. So for Latifi, 2020 was what could have been seen as a relatively normal rookie season, and despite him being certainly less consistent than teammate George Russell, there was yet to be anything majorly wrong, but there was something brewing within the F1 fanbase that would come to a head in 2021. The season honestly opened with more of the same for Latifi. A DNF in the season opener of Bahrain due to more gripes with the Williams car. Then in the next race, a lap 1 crash led to the driver again not finishing. It was around this time some of the fans had come up with an ironic sort of nickname for the driver, known as Go Tifi, a sarcastic response to Nicholas's poor results. You can see how with this negative attention, general lack of points, and usually underperforming his teammate, Latifi would probably begin to lose some of that confidence and motivation he might have had before. Until he actually hit a stroke of good luck. Valtteri Bottas decided it was time to go bowling with a huge portion of the F1 grid during the race at Hungary, which led to Go Tifi running as high as 3rd, with him likely praying the race ended there and then. Sadly for Nicholas, it did not, but he did achieve a career high finish of 7th after Vettel's disqualification. This streak of points would continue into the next race for Latifi, as he began 9th despite qualifying 12th during the strange Belgian Grand Prix that saw no actual racing. So he also finished 9th, scoring more points for the team, as of course it took a race with no racing for Latifi to score more points. This result was also overshadowed by teammate George Russell scoring 2nd in the same race. A rare podium for Williams, given George's magnificent effort in qualifying. Things were finally looking on the up for Latifi, but he would quickly return to his crash-happy ways as the season went on, and it was one crash that really defined the rest of his career. 2021 was certainly a dramatic season for Formula 1. The title battle came down to the 2 megastars of Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Go Tifi, however, was out of the race for the title, but was obviously not out of competing in the final race of the season, Abu Dhabi, where Lewis and Max were tied exactly on points, and the winner would be whoever finished in front of the other. Lewis had a substantial lead by the end of the race, and it looked like everything was going to play out in his favor. But that's when, as he had done so many times over the last couple years, Nicholas Latifi lost control of the car and hit the wall, bringing out the safety car. Shenanigans ensued, with certain cars being allowed to pass the safety car in a decision never before made by a Formula 1 race director, and Max would be crowned champion that day. Obviously, given the already high stakes and controversial nature of the season, this blew everything up, with Formula 1 pretty much divided between those who support Hamilton and those who supported Verstappen. Yet one driver was caught in the middle, Latifi. He received abuse from many fans who were upset at the result given for the race, and although only a small minority, it was still enough to certainly leave an impact on Nicholas, who at this point was probably again suffering from a massive knock to his confidence after such an inconsistent season. This is where the nickname Go Tifi would massively take off for him, and many people would mock his lack of accolades, but follow it up by saying he gave 1 world championship assist to Verstappen. And this was really the moment you could pinpoint as the beginning of the end for Latifi. It was clear that with the disappointing cars, the poor results, and the abuse from fans, he'd fallen out of love with the sport he was once so determined to succeed in. At this point though, it was already set in stone that he'd drive for 2022, but it was just more of the same for Latifi. Williams team boss Jost Capito made attempts to rebuild Nick's confidence, but with so many rumors of him being replaced mid-season and the constant teasing from the fans, Latifi chose to leave Formula One at the end of the year. And that was it. There were no more posts, no more announcements of another drive in another series like F1 retirees usually do. It was all quiet on the Latifi front. But what Nicholas didn't expect was a huge outcry of fans. They weren't exactly calling for Latifi to come back to F1, although a small minority were. But many of them commented all over his social media, just asking for an update on how he was doing or simply wishing him well. They may have first laughed at the Latifi memes, I'm sure we all had a little chuckle, but now it had become a community who actually cared for Latifi and his well-being. So this encouraged Nick to put out a statement, one final post wishing his fans farewell and updating us all on what he was pursuing next. He decided for 2023 he wouldn't continue racing and instead would pursue the world of business, likely inspired by his father before him. And that's what he went off to study, leaving the playboy lifestyle of Grand Prix racing behind him. And in a roundabout sort of way, many people were happy for him to have found some kind of peace outside of F1. It can be a harsh, critical environment, and for some people, that's just not what they want. If you did enjoy this video, however, please subscribe for more. It massively helps the channel, and I'm looking to make more F1 and racing content. Goodbye!